Welcome to our conversation about buying a business. This is an exciting topic to talk about. It's exciting to think about. The research is really interesting. But today, on behalf of the SBDC in Toledo, I want to talk to you about buying a business and some of the considerations that you may have. Now, I'm not an attorney, and I always suggest talking to one before purchasing a business. You can find out more information by reaching out to your local SBDC. We can help with different planning aspects and even connect you with an attorney if you need one. That said, there's some general guidelines and some generalities that happen really throughout all business transactions, or I should say most business transactions when purchasing a business. If this is your first time through and you're thinking of purchasing a small business, this video is going to give you a great overview, kind of a great layout of what normally happens and some of the terminology you should be familiar with before entering into this world. So let's get started. And again, should you need more help, more assistance, reach out to your local SBDC. So what are the steps in purchasing a business? What are some of the different timelines that you might see when thinking of purchasing a business? So the first step is finding your own interest, right? So I can't within this video tell you what business you should purchase. Now, that said, you might think about sticking inside of something that you're familiar with. So if you understand a certain industry, if you have contacts or a strong network in a certain industry, that's obviously a great place to start when you're looking to buy a small business to take over. The steps are really pretty similar in many deals. And it starts off with finding your interest and having general conversations. So, you might approach the owner might approach you, you might be approached by a small business broker, or if you're considering buying a small business, you might reach out to a broker, let them know you're interested, see what type of inventory they have. However that works, the connection is made between yourself looking to buy a business and then a potential business to take on. A lot of times you'll have very general conversations. What's the business look like? How long has it been around? Where are the buildings? What are the different assets? Now with that, you'll probably move into something that's a little more detailed, and you'll likely be asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement, or they might use the term NDA. So that's fine. Again, if you're uncomfortable with it, have a lawyer look it over for you. But most of the time, that's just saying that you won't go out and talk about what you're learning as part of this process about the business. So the steps. The first step, normally, if you're interested in buying the business after talking and want to learn more, is a letter of intent. Now, this is always, or should be, a non-binding, non-legally binding letter. It's just a level of seriousness to let the seller know that you're moving forward to talk about a general price, to talk about some general guidelines and general ideas. So that letter of intent is kind of the first formalization of the deal. Now, after you have a letter of intent, most of the time you have a due diligence period. So this is where you can actually get inside the books of the business. You can talk to the managers. You can see the assets. You can visit the shop. Now, the owner's going to ask you to say or not say some things, right? Especially around the employees or the clients. But this due diligence period is when you find out exactly what it is that you're buying. You'll then, after determining that you want to move forward, if you do so, you'll sign a formal contract, and this should be reviewed by an attorney. It's worth a couple $100s to have somebody look at this, and then you'll close the deal, with the owner of the business that you're purchasing. So that's the process. That's the guideline. That's the steps. So it's typically some type of interest. You find the business you're interested in, and then you have your letter of intent to kind of formalize, the moving forward with the deal, get a price laid out. There's a due diligence period where you'll interview people from the different aspects of the business, maybe even the clients. You'll contract, and then you'll close. One of the toughest, most subjective part of buying a business is understanding what it's worth, right? How do you determine the value of the business? And this could be an hour-long recording, and we could just barely scratch the surface. The first thing that I'll say is every business is different in how it should be valued. And I know it's not helpful, right? So here's how you value it. They're all different. But there are some common themes among valuing businesses. So what we have to remember is it's what it's worth to you. It truly is subjective. There are a lot of decisions that are made when valuing business. There are multiple methods that are used. So the first thing we'll talk about, and again, this is a high level introduction, really mostly of just the concepts and the terms. The first thing we'll talk about would be asset value. So one of the easiest, but oftentimes least desirable ways to value a business would be what's its liquidation cost, right? So if you were going to buy an excavating company, you might look at, if I were to sell all of these machines and trucks and equipment, if I were to sell all those on the street, what's the value? As a buyer, that's probably something you should be aware of, because that kind of helps set the minimum, right? That's a good place to start, because you understand if you were just buying assets, like that's it, what would this cost? If you wanted to go build this thing yourself, which is an option, what would this cost you? So if you're a buyer, you're hoping that the business is worth a little bit more alive than it is dead, but it's always nice to know what the parts are worth if you were to part it out. So one way to look at this is through what's the street value of the assets, but again, that's a pretty pessimistic look, because that's saying that the business is worth more dead, all the parts, than it is alive. And a business that is alive typically produces profits, right? So we would look at, in most cases, something called seller's discretionary earnings. So as a small business, especially one where you're going to be working significantly in the business itself, then you would want to see, what's the seller get to take home? What is truly the income of the seller? So that may be a salary, that may be the seller's spouse's salary, that may be benefits to the seller. Sometimes you'll see a lot of these things like travel, meetings and entertainment, meals and entertainment. A lot of times, if you look at a business owner's salary or profit, that is a small part, maybe not small, but that's only part of the true benefit, the true financial benefit that your seller would have for owning the business. So a lot of times the profit of the business plus the seller's salary is a good starting point for seller's discretionary earnings, but throwing in things such as the meals and entertainment, the different travel, if their spouse or children have salaries on the payroll, all of that would add up to the seller's discretionary earnings. In many small business transactions, this is what we look at as far as income streams, right? So one way to look at a business is it's a bunch of parts. Those are the assets. And if we were going to value the asset value, what's the street value of each of those assets? Another way to value a business is to look at seller's discretionary income as the financial benefit the operating business has to the owner. That's why you're buying it, right? You want the money that it's sending out. So a lot of business transactions take place, or businesses are valued, that's loosely used, by multiples of seller's discretionary income. Now, I'm not going to get into what are the multiples, right? But you can find, there are major databases. If you work with a broker, they can tell you. If you reach out to your SBDC, they can give you some information and show you some different databases where you can find that in a certain industry, for a certain size business, the average business is selling for some multiple of seller's discretionary income. So you may be looking at an excavating business that does $3 million a year in a certain area of the country that's been around for 10 years. You can actually find that stuff and come up to see what are the average multiples of seller's discretionary income that a business like that is selling for. So you may find that the owner has a seller's discretionary income of $200,000 a year. Well, if you look at the data, you might find out that most of these similar businesses are selling for, let's say, 4 times seller's discretionary earnings. In that would give you some type of idea, right? As an estimated, it's an idea of an estimated value of about $800,000. If the seller's bringing home about $200,000 and the average market deal is showing about 4 times seller's discretionary earnings, you might expect to see a price of about $800,000. Again, that is just input. All of these are just data points. So if we look at the asset value, what's this thing worth dead versus alive, that gives us one kind of end of the spectrum. If we look at, what's the seller's discretionary earnings times the average multiple, that would give us another end of the spectrum. All we're trying to do is see about what this thing is worth, try to build out some data points to give us some signals as to, okay, what might be a fair price. So we've talked about the general steps, and we've talked about determining the value. This is a part 1 of a 2-part series. In the next part, which is a video, will still be on the same YouTube page, we're going to talk briefly about buying the business as itself, or just buying the assets, which there's a lot of considerations there. And then we're going to talk about how to fund that purchase. So please click on the next video, and we'll go over the remaining topics. Thanks.